friends invite me to conferences, and then they usually give me afternoon session. I tell them, why do you invite me to afternoon sessions? Then they say, well, you can keep the audience provoked and then keep them awake. But I don't think that is needed here. I think the audience is aware, and then they're action-oriented. So I don't need to keep them awake, nor do I need to keep them, sort of make them aware of something. I wish to thank the organizers of Awareness in Action and friends like Chaitra, who made it possible for me to take part in this symposium and learn from you, and also share my ideas with you. What I'll try to talk to you, in fact, morning session expert speakers spoke already and covered many areas. Most important points they have already covered. Professor Sridhar and Professor Raghunath, they have done that. What I'll try to do is a little modest job of confining myself to one specific domain. That is that during the era, in the last 25 years of globalization, what has happened to Indian education, especially higher education. That's the thing that I wish to focus on. That's a narrow area, delimited one. But then before we get into the topic, we all know that globalization, the genealogies of globalization are multiple. Professor Sridhar was talking about Takshashila in the morning. If you go to Silk Road, there is one kind of globalization. And then if you go to some other kind of domain, there is another kind of globalization. And also same is the case with education or higher education. There are many multiple genealogies. But again, there I would like to confine myself to very narrow, focused, limited area, and then talk about higher education in the context of India in the last 140, 150 years. And I'll be very brief about the earlier parts for the simple reason that the focus is going to be globalization as is understood in the last 25 years. How does it work? It's not on, is it? Oh, that's fine. All right. Indian education, higher education mainly, can be discussed in terms of first 100 years of education on the one hand, that is from 1857 to 1947 or 1950s, and then 50s to 90s, and 90s to contemporary times. These are the three phases in which one can discuss higher education in the Indian context. By the way, I want to kind of dispel all kind of assumptions that I'm an education expert. I'm not an education expert. I teach English. I teach in the Department of English Literature. I barely teach English literature. I teach other kind of things. But nevertheless, being an English teacher and teaching at the higher education institution, I need to know what's happening to higher education. That's the reason why I got interested in this domain, and then I started focusing on that for quite some time. So the first 100 years, am I audible? Is it clear enough? Yes. The first 100 years, 1857 to 1957, there are certain kind of designs that have taken place. Education was introduced, especially higher education was introduced to alter the mind of the native permanently, to transform the mind and mentality or ways of thinking of the natives. Okay, and higher education was given to a very small number of people. The universities were limited. The higher education universities were introduced only in 3 metropolitan cities, and then these were the British institutions. And there was a kind of hierarchic structure. And the hierarchic structure, Professor Raghunath's talk in the morning mentioned, and what's going to happen to that. The administrative university will deal with administrative matters, and servicing, actual teaching and all, the kind of dirty job will be done by the colleges. Colleges will do the teaching, and then universities will administer exams, curriculum, syllabus, and other things. That's the kind of hierarchical structure that Britishers have introduced in the 1850s and subsequent period. The teacher's role, the teacher becomes a certain kind of middleman, a certain kind of broker, as it were, between the natives, millions of natives on the one hand, and the administrators on the other hand. Macaulay was very clear. He said that we need brown bodies with white mind, as it were. So the education was oriented towards turning our minds into white minds, So altering is a kind of what they call in technical language of philosophy and literary theory, they say that it's altering the episteme. That is that your ways of thinking will be transformed and you are compelled to speak and learn and then see the world on the basis of the education that you get. So teacher becomes a sort of middleman, and then between the ruling master and the ruled native. That's kind of situation that prevailed for 100 years. Okay, and the model on the basis of which modern university got established, the model for that came from Germany. In Germany, modern education university came into existence in 1810, designed by this philosopher called Humboldt. And then Humboldt had a very different idea. Universities were meant for researchers, for dissemination of knowledges, and then gathering of new knowledges and dissemination of new knowledges and training people to learn these new knowledges. That was the idea of the university. But the Indian university, the way it was introduced, it had no place for research at all. And then that's the problem that we have inherited in our modern institutions. Then, of course, we come to the freedom period when there is a kind of euphoria, and then we were described, India and many other countries who gained freedom around that time, they were described as new nations. And the new nations also will have to be sort of programmed, if you like. There must be new designs for new nations. And these new designs began to come into existence, and then they were received, accepted, incorporated, and welcomed in the Indian context. And the new university, the way it began to change in the post-independence period, 1950s, I can go into a lot of detail here, but I don't want to do that. I'll give you one instance. The then Prime Minister Nehru invited the Ford Foundation people and discussed with them extensively how to transform school education and Indian education. There were long discussions, and then Ford Foundation itself has begun to play a tremendous amount of role in the Indian context. So the point is that India was considered to be a traditional society. In the configuration of a new nation, the nation was considered to be an ancient one, an old one, a traditional one, and that requires modernization. Transformation is required. Another kind of transformation that is going to be undertaken now in the modern context in the independent period. That's why you will get, how do we translate, how do we transform ancient civilizations was a major challenge. So there is a whole course that was designed called Anthropology of Civilizations. How do we study how do we anthropologize civilizations? That is that these are civilizations like small communities. You go to these communities, study them, and then describe the characteristics and find out the ways in which these can be transformed. So there is a great book, a classic, actually it came from Chicago, a man called Milton Singer, who was at the head of these kind of studies in the 1950s. The book itself is called When a Great Tradition Modernizes. So that's a symptomatic kind of concept, modernization. What does modernization involve? It involves industrialization. You can think about temples of modern India, Nehru's phrase, okay? So the new dams, big dams, industries, etc., etc. Modernization involves undertaking mega projects and in the process meddling with the rhythms of nature. Today, 50 years later, you begin to see what happened, what are the consequences of these mega projects, you will begin to see. I just been to Odisha, and the devastation that the ocean is wreaking on the Odisha coast is incredible. And these are all the consequences of a certain kind of steps that we have taken, the way we build the temples of modern India. That's a part of modernization. Industrialization, building of mega project, whether industry or dams. Then urbanization and bureaucratization. These are the ways in which modernization has taken place. The consequences of that could be seen very concretely. And of course, each of these points can be elaborated voluminously, but we don't have time now. I'm just kind of indicating what are the kind of transformations that have taken place in the context of higher education, especially in the context of universities. I'd like to confine myself to higher education universities. But these processes were happening, these processes apparently from outside, like modernization, industrialization, these are outside processes, but they've had tremendous amount of impact on the university curriculum also. So you'll begin to see new studies coming into existence. Green Revolution is something that has happened during this epoch, this period, in the post-independence period, very specifically maneuvered, very specifically practiced, tested, and then introduced. So along with that, it's an awkward phrase, but let me coin it, social scientization of Indian studies has happened. In the post-war period, especially from 1950s onwards, India turned into basically an object of social science studies. but also at the same time social science as a respectable discipline, as a covetable model of knowledge that got introduced into India. This has been done very systematically. It has been done. So the new projects began to come out. How do these social sciences undertake their researches? What do they study? The new whole field of studies has come into existence called area studies. That is that researchers will come, go to pick up a particular area, they focus on that area, and they generate knowledge about that area. Information about that region, what kind of mineral resources are there, what kind of natural resources are there, the entire sketching of this. In fact, every university in the US was given this material that is gathered from new nations, especially India. India became actually, this is the word that is used in research documents in the archive. I spent time in Berkeley and Chicago looking at the archival documentation. India was used as a laboratory for two kinds of things: the modernization project on the one hand, and the study of the impact of modernization on the other hand. And the studies were undertaken by social science researchers. I do not want to give you the impression that I'm going to tell you a conspiracy story. There's no conspiracy story here. It is very clear, very open, everything is done, and the archival material is available, accessible to anybody to look at them. These have happened systematically by means of, through the institutions, through intergovernmental agreements. This is what has happened. So this new model of knowledge comes into existence: area studies, modernization studies. New institutions also will begin to come into existence. But the aim was to actually transform, reform these things, and then modernize them. So you will see the new institutions, how to do agriculture, how to modernize agriculture, how to modernize our study of societies, how to modernize our approaches to humanities studies. So you have very concrete, very specific institutions that come into existence: ICAR, ICAR, ICSSR, which is modeled on ISSR in the US, actually, in Indian Social Science Research. Okay. On the basis of that, ICSSR comes into existence. ASRC, American Studies Research Center, which came into existence in the 60s. These are all what we call today, in certain areas of study, neo-colonial institutions. That is, that institutions which continue to practice a certain kind of approach and method of the colonial model. They continued, but these do not happen through any kind of coercion as such. We invite ourselves to undertake these kind of studies. So huge amount of fellowships and scholarships are given. These enable people. I myself am a beneficiary of such scholarship, but I didn't do that research. I did a counter research, as it were. What kind of projects were undertaken. That's the kind of thing I was doing. So there are a lot of new kinds of institutions. This is a euphoric scenario, I must tell you. That is that young people who are probably in their 60s now, young people are 60s and 70s, they led themselves, they invited themselves to undertake these kind of projects, genuinely thinking that they're contributing to knowledge, genuinely, believing that they're developing, they're transforming India by means of new knowledges. And the model for knowledges came. I mean, I can give you concrete instances about these, who are these people involved, and what kind of research has gone on, but we don't have time. If there is time for discussion, I'd love to talk about that. So India becomes a laboratory for testing the social science models. That's the phrase that is used. So the social science models developed, and then they're tested here in the field at the ground level. And Chicago played an extraordinarily important role in that one. And social science becomes the model for generating new knowledges. So in this process, this looks like too presumptuous, say, how do you organize the world? But you may not believe it if I say that in 1949, Rockefeller Foundation organized a conference. The title of that conference was How to Reorganize the World. That's the conference, no less, no more. How to reorganize the entire world. And then the philanthropic organizations in the West, in the US, played an immensely significant role. Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie Foundation, Ford Foundation. India was chosen by Ford Foundation, the world map was reorganized, and then each of these kind of philanthropic organizations, overnight they turned their orientation towards American foreign policy. On the basis of that, in conjunction with American foreign policy, they unleashed a whole set of activities in these countries. Rockefeller in rice research, Rockefeller in health, Rockefeller in medicine, Ford Foundation in education, Ford Foundation in folklore. If you look at, those of you who come from social sciences, if you look at the kind of work that was encouraged by Ford Foundation on folkloristic studies, you will see what I'm talking about. Chicago, Berkeley, and Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania, these are the major institutions A.K. Ramanujan, Kannada writer, wrote an interesting story called Annaya's Anthropology. I certainly recommend that story to you. It's a delightful story. It deals with the dilemma of a young person going from Mysore to study in Berkeley. Then he's amazed at the number of books about India that are available in these universities. He's completely bewildered by this. He's taken aback by this. His respect for the US goes incredibly high. Okay, so but at the end of the story, he gets a kind of he gets shattered by discovering something in those libraries. Okay, so the libraries are immense. The knowledge, in the sense of available social science knowledge that has been created, the resources are immense in these three universities. The experts came from these places. The social science models, to a very large extent, were kind of generated, programmed, modeled, monitored, and then disseminated by the American universities. A large number of Indians, many institutions have simply adopted them because incentives were available. On the basis of that, new knowledge of this kind was created. But it was applicational model. The researching was taking place on the basis of application of a particular model, Modernization Studies. Okay, so modernization becomes a model. On the basis of that, this study of a particular domain takes place. And then, but this transformation came to an end by the end of 80s and at the beginning of 90s. So systematically, there's something called area studies. That is that researchers can pick up, universities can pick up specific areas of the world and focus on that and study it in a comprehensive way. That is, psychologists can study, sociologists can study, public administration people can study, policy people can study, and political scientists can study. Then the knowledge can be brought together. Actually, the knowledge never got integrated, as far as I know. But nevertheless, these new kind of knowledges got developed. Okay, but this was supported by American government. Okay, through various kinds of policy decisions that was done. But this area studies project came to an end. It was deliberately dismantled by the time we come to the 90s. When we come to the 90s, we begin to see that the world gets reorganized in a different way. The world gets programmed, as it were. Wiring of the world takes place. New developments in technology take place. Information and communication technology comes in. And first, what happens, as you know, many of you know, wiring the countries, wiring the nations takes place. That is through fiber optic cable, under marine cables. Through that, financial systems get connected. And then the world trade takes place. Stock markets get connected, and the transformation takes place in an exponential way. And capital, that is, when you connect the stock markets, money flows from one country to another country with the speed of light, as we know. And then in the morning, Professor Sridhar was talking about GATS. GATS comes into picture, a General Agreement on Trade and Services, that comes into place in 1995. And then information technologies begin to put a lot of pressure, and then they begin to actually, in an aggressive way, they enter the Indian scenario. And then the transformation of the world is going to be imminent. That is unavoidable. That begins to happen. The planet gets connected, if you like, through fiber optic cables. And education suddenly becomes, because education becomes a certain kind of business, and in an area of investment and capital. And also it's a certain kind of service, but a service oriented towards connecting the world, transferring the labor, that is teachers. On the basis of that, developments can take place. This is the idea. Thank you. With which these developments were taking place. So when education becomes a certain kind of business, as we can imagine, one second. So what we are talking about when we say globalization, we are talking about the new entrant, unlike just the trade that has taken place, a business that has taken place from Silk Road period and the subsequent ocean trade period to the new one. When we are talking about the new role player, a major role player is the communications technologies. These communication technologies under marine technologies and through various kinds of means, world gets connected. Money gets transferred with an immense kind of speed, and and then new kind of business ventures begin to take place. So these developments, as I've sketched in the context of modernization period, in the globalization period also, they have begun to have tremendous amount of impact on Indian universities. But Indian universities, I must say that I'll have to give you a dampening story. It is not going to be a very euphoric one, because I'll sketch what's happened in the last 25 years in the universities, which I've seen. I participated in all these things, but many others also. There are seniors here, so they may have also similar kind of or better experiences with regard to the phenomenon that we are talking about. So Indian universities are hopelessly unprepared for this, the invasive developments. So what are these invasive developments? Quality, standards, because globalization makes it a kind of compulsory that these particular parameters are put in place. What are the parameters? Quality education. If you're transferring your services, it must be a quality service, and it must abide by certain kind of standards, and it must be internationally oriented. There's no point in simply saying that I'm doing my work in my street and this is my knowledge. That is not going to help somebody else. How do you communicate your whatever the discovery that you have to larger world? How do other people come and then participate in the kind of inquiry that you have undertaken? These become important kind of questions. So internationalization, innovation, research, and above all, the new concept of knowledge comes into picture. As we know, knowledge is actually digitization of any humanly created material, substance, relationship through electronic medium. And then, so everything can become the Hoysala sculpture, or Vijayanagara, Hampi temples, all these can become knowledge because they can be digitized and they can be transferred with the speed of light. So this becomes a new knowledge. Knowledge is data really. Okay, knowledge is not something that you have acquired on the basis of deeper reflections and meditative kind of inquiry, sitting under a tree or sitting in isolation. But this is a very different kind of knowledge that we are talking about. And that actually quantifies everything that has been created by human beings over probably millennia. That gets transferred. That is easily transferable. So, but the parameters must be in place. But Indian universities barely meet the standards that are set in place, which globalization demands. And education is an area where GATS has faced a lot of problems, and then that many of us have witnessed. The problem, why is it Indian universities are unprepared? Well, many Indian universities tend to think that teaching is just a certain kind of, to doing government's job. Yeah, sarkari naukri mil gaya to ho gaya, shaadi kar lein. Yeah, so this is the kind of attitude many people tend to have. Okay, even now, I'm not talking about myself or one or two people. I'm not isolating an individual saying, but that's the general environment that we witness in the context of the university. Okay, so this once you got a job, what else? You have a sarkari naukri, and then what else? Do you have to read still? In fact, several times in my own house, people keep saying that you finish your PhD, why do you have to read? It's incomprehensible that somebody should read after one gets a job. So, teacher at best can be a reformer of the tradition. This is again a colonial malaise. That's what the Macaulay's design was. To make the teacher a source for transforming the millions. Yeah, so we can't transform the millions. We transform a few people. They in turn will transform the rest of the crowd. Okay. So university and college, the colonial relationship continues to remain. University is the dominant one, it decides everything, and colleges simply implement what the university demands. Okay, it's a top-down approach. And disincentivization. Suppose you teach in a small college, you come up with an idea. Sir, English can be taught to villagers in this particular way. Your model will never be recognized. You are on the contrary disincentivized. Are you getting your salary or not? Yes, I'm getting my salary. Once in 2 months I'm getting. Are you happy or not? There are people working without 6 months salary. So these are all the stories that are given to us. And as a result of that, the young teacher bubbling with kind of enthusiasm, he or she won't be able to undertake anything. And then callous indifference. You submit a file with a new project. The project never gets looked at. Or damns, kind of cynicism. The cynicism is that, Arey yaar, do you know my gray hair or my hairlessness? This is the result of years of experience. Are you telling me that you can do something, you can change the system? You can't change the system. So this is a certain kind of callous indifference that prevails in the universities and comes into, comes in the way of preparation. the university is not prepared for the transformations and the parameters that the world has set up for us. This is generally the case. There are always exceptions to every system that we talk about. Well, globalization involves, puts in certain kind of novel conditions. It requires new workforce must be generated, new workforce which will undertake the kind of work that is required, new work that is based on something called data management and on the basis of knowledge understood in this particular sense. So institutions must be expanded and marketable curriculum must be developed. And then, of course, the other demand is that if you are not in your domain, one of the demands of globalization is that your closed up terrain must be opened up so that others can come in. The goods must come in, services must come in, so teachers must come in from outside, and the goods like teaching material and curriculum can come from outside, and then you must receive it. In the Indian context, there is a lot of resistance to these foreign providers. I'll talk about that in a minute. So in the 1990s, which is again a euphoric scenario, NASSCOM, National Association of Software Services Companies, and NASSCOM predicted that, India produces 65,000 engineers every year, 90% of them who go abroad from these 65,000, 90% never return to India. They want to settle down in the US. So the workforce is generated, but it serves some other country. So the workforce doesn't remain here. So NASSCOM predicted that by 2020, we need something like 2 million workforce we need. And that's NASSCOM's prediction in 1999. It submits a report. And of course, the NASSCOM's expectations have been, far surpassed by the NASSCOM's, what NASSCOM indicates today. Today, IT workforce in the country is 4.1 million, okay, not 2 million. It's much, much bigger and contributes to something like $180 billion of revenue for the country, okay. So, but 1999, this is euphoric. That new workforce based on technology, based on information technologies that must be developed. So, one of the first role players in this one, a mega role player, is the then state called Andhra Pradesh, and Chandrababu Naidu played a critical role here. He immediately designed an IT policy in 1997. I used to follow all these things very carefully, very clearly during those days. 97, Indian IT policy comes into existence in 1998. Andhra Pradesh designs its IT policy in 1997, 1 year ahead. And then immediately the new courses like IT and biotech, AP designs its biotech policy in 2001. And so these begin to take place and these get implemented. And very cleverly, Chandrababu Naidu does not design an education policy, higher education policy in India. Documents get circulated. GATS report comes, GATS demands come, they are in place, but Chandrababu Naidu will not design an IT policy, education policy. But all the officers in the country are familiar, in the state are familiar what the government's approach is. So what happens overnight, hundreds and hundreds of engineering colleges get opened up in Andhra Pradesh, hundreds and hundreds, okay? And then everybody is given a chance to open. Whoever wanted to open, they open the engineering colleges. So you're flooded with mushroomed engineering colleges, unprecedented expansion of private, because the workforce must be generated. We are talking about, when we say workforce, in the age group of 18 or 17 to 25, young people must be trained to meet the newer challenges. And IT is generating these newer challenges. So new models come in. So engineering colleges open up. And private education institutions, kind of just begin to overwhelm other institutions, okay? These have consequences on the universities, okay? And the new model called distance education comes into picture. We need to generate this workforce, so by means of distance education or by means of private education, you develop this, okay? This is what is happening. Consequence of that is public institutions get undermined. Public institutions get, orphan treatment. Part-time teachers take place. Part-time teachers, as Professor Raghunath was talking about in the morning, quality suffers because you begin to bring in part-time teachers. They have no incentive in this one. They are never going to know whether they're going to get a permanent job. So, and then significant closure of recruitment. Recruitment doesn't take place. Even to this day, both in Andhra and Telangana, 50%, 60% of the jobs are open, but they are not recruited. They don't recruit them. Funding gets cut down. And then, of course, this is the World Bank statement. World Bank churns out a new mantra called higher education is no longer a merit good. It's no merit good. Initially, World Bank came up with this proposal in the 90s, and then everybody accepts it. It's no merit good. That means that you need to support yourself. Until now, we have supported you. Now, whatever the benefits that you are going to get from higher education are going to be helpful to you, not to us. This is the attitude. So this is what happens. And I have seen this in my own university, but many universities reinforce this. Library funding gets cut down, right? Library funding gets cut down, but IT funding, the new kind of monster that emerges, IT funding increases. In social science and humanities institutions, I've seen several generations of computers bought immediately, put in the storeroom, and never opened. This is what happened for about 5 to 7 years in my own university. But it happened in many other universities because there's no preparedness. You do not know what to do with that. Many of my colleagues used to say when I used to champion internet and computing stuff, then they used to say that well, for us, computer is a typewriter, and our typewriting can be taken care by our secretaries. So, Dr. Rao, why should we bother about this? That's the kind of response that one used to get. So we ourselves are the kind of impediments for the development that is actually invading us, if you like. Downsizing of the library takes place, but infrastructural funding for the IT gets enhanced. Okay. And of course, even after 25 years of higher education, ICT developments, social science and humanities lag behind incredibly with regard to making use of information technology. We do not know how to make use of that. In most of the universities, this is the situation. And many universities don't have common computing labs also. That's another situation that we see. Then, well, there's a top-down approach which continues. We tend to think that, okay, well, universities, public institutions suffer from quality. They're not prepared. There are no standards. So how do we do that? There's no research. All these things can be done overnight by inviting the foreigners. So the foreigners' magic wand is going to transform our university. The dirty, like Cinderella story. And then I can give you concrete statements by people like Sibyl and all, euphorically in 2007, 8, and then subsequent period, what he was saying, that foreign universities will come and they will transform our university. No foreign university is going to do that because foreign universities are interested in specific things. They will not inculcate research culture in your university. They will not invest in heavy capital-intensive, technical or science labs. They're not going to do that. They're going to send only simply popular courses for the brand purposes. Okay, there are three kinds of foreign universities. The foreign universities who actually want to spread their, kind of samraj, if you like. They want to spread their name. They want to spread their glory. So they come, they're not interested in profit per se directly. There's a first category. So like Harvard and then other kind of universities, they offer some popular courses, if you like, in some places. The second kind of university is that they want to kind of, expand their name but earn money. That's the middle range universities. They also come in and start playing the role. Then the third kind of university, the worst kind of university is that I need money. So by hook or crook, I'll suck the money out of your country because there's a tremendous amount of demand. A lot of people want to learn. What they want is only a label, a foreign label. So there are predators like there are names, like Apollo Group, and then the Laureate company, Laureate Educational Link. AP government had a tie with Laureate, and then there are some problems. They ran into problems. So these are the kind of foreign providers who will not tackle your problems. As an aside, I just want to make a mention of a famous philosopher at one point he said that we know that Europe suffers from a lot of problems. Europe has tremendous amount of problems. But I also know that the problems that Europe is facing can find solutions from Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism may be able to solve our problems, but that is not going to be a solace for Europeans. We need to sort out the solution for our problems. That's what he said. Similarly, our problems are our problems. We don't have a research culture in the universities. So foreign provider is not going to find out what is the research culture that is necessary for you. On the contrary, they are interested in only transforming your mind so that you will become the market for them. That's what they are interested in. So this is our problem. Let's not blame anybody else, but this is our problem. This continues to persist in the last 100, 150 years. So foreign providers at the most will provide MBAs. MBAs are successful, okay? And then the universities, many universities enthusiastically, Professor Raghunath was mentioning earlier, many universities have joined MOUs, signed up MOUs. These are only for photo occasions. In many universities, vice chancellors want to show the document and say that, we have signed an agreement with this white-skinned or red-skinned person, and this is our document. MOUs have not materialized in any kind of concrete kind of research. I'm not being cynical. I'm being concerned about the university and research in higher education. And what I'm talking about, the reality, what that has taken place, that has manifested in the last 25 years, okay? Foreign medicine is not like to sort out, it's not going to be a solution for Indian ailments, Indian diseases. Well, in the meanwhile, what happened? Social science is no longer an important subject because in the post-independence period, social sciences is the model for education, for knowledge creation in many of the universities. And so NGOs take over social sciences. And then they provide a different way of doing social sciences, different models of doing social sciences. These are all donor-driven, that the funding agency gives them money, on the basis of that researchers are developed, project funded, and then the models for them come up from specific institutions funded again by international funding organizations, and then they develop and these get addressed. So social science, the NGOs play a major role. They are educators, they are research providers, they are knowledge developers. That's what happens. And the universities no longer become very significant places where investment in universities becomes necessary. Social science also does not change much in the universities. The new researchers begin to emerge from other places. Area studies, in the US itself, area studies project gets closed down. So the universities are asked, universities are asked to get funding. If you want to organize a conference, it should be a self-financed conference or self-financed courses. Some of the universities were asked to do during this period to undertake this. Because the model here comes again from the kind of synergy that developed in the context of science research and Western universities. This is the case in the 70s and 80s. It began in the 70s, but it developed both biotech industry in the case of West, especially in the US, that developed in a connection with the private researchers, private funding organizations, and the universities like Berkeley, Chicago, and many places these developments have taken place. But in the Indian context, the synergy between university and industry was very poor, if at all it existed. Globalization period did not, in fact, contribute in any major way for enhancing the research, strengthening the relation between university and the industry. Universities own limitations, even after 25 years. When you begin to look at what has happened in the last 25 years of globalization, you begin to see that student intake is great. Professor Sridhar was giving the latest picture of AISHE, that is All India Survey of Higher Education. It says that 37 million people are recruited every year. They go for higher education, but that is even small in the Indian context. It should be about 50 million people probably, I think. Okay, and research intake. There is one. I mean, it's stunning to notice that only 126,000 researchers are recruited every year in India. Yeah, with 900 universities, 40,000 colleges, our researchers are 1.226. I'm given a liberally 1.3 lakhs. And only 1/5 of them pass out. They register for a PhD degree and 1/5 of them pass out. Okay. Publication scenario is poor. I mean, if you look at the comparative studies, MHRD website shows you the comparative studies in terms of publications. We are very poor. It is not developed, and peer-reviewed journal publications are limited, and largely science obviously dominates rather than the humanities and social sciences. And then there is a managerialization. This is another kind of monster that has entered in the university scenario. That is that evaluating the teachers' capabilities on the basis of what is called API scores. It's a nightmare for every teacher. If you want to get promoted, you need to have certain number of API scores. These require publications. And as a result, you have opened up a certain kind of Pandora's box in the university. If you go and sit on the, selection committees, which I happen to do sometimes, selection committees, candidates come with cartloads of books, which I myself don't have. Cartloads of books. They're all published beautifully, with designed and everything. Where are they published? They're published in, some street corners, some, Kempe Gowda turning point. And you will find a publisher there. Okay? That publisher publishes 5 copies. And 5 copies are brought to your interview committee. So every street corner has a publishing industry now. Okay? And then desktop publications. So it has given birth to this kind of spurious publication racket. And nobody forgets to include, in every of these publications, very honestly, they include that it is an international publication with an ISBN number. These are required. Why? This API score model insists that you should publish in an international journal, then you'll get 50 marks. All these are there. This managerialization of the university has led to all kinds of other problems. And then it's so terrible in the university scenario, those who teach and then who feel for the university and the need for transforming the university, one begins to see what the problems are. And in spite of all these 25 years of higher education, there is no world-class university in the country. We have not been able to develop a world-class university. There are world-class teaching centers like IITs. Excellent teaching takes place, but they're not research institutions. They do BTech and go away for MS and settle down in the US. These are not research institutions. The research is marginal. Research takes place only in the universities, or ought to take place in the universities. Not even in the private universities. Private universities are not research intensive. They are doing certain kind of other work. Okay? So there's not a single world-class university. And the investment, our own investment in the country is very, very low compared to China and compared to many other countries. We are somewhere there in the line. No wonder higher education is pathos-ridden. Yeah, there is absence of leadership, no vision, no commitment, no recognition. And then, of course, as a result of this, when you don't have an activity, but then you have the security of Sarkari Naukri, then what do? You have a lot of time. So you indulge in other kind of activities, all kinds of activities, politics, machinations, public ceremonies, everything. You plant a tree, a sapling, and then you have a photo picture. And then you look for this supplement of your daily newspaper, supplement in the 26th page on this local supplement, your 2-line report about your sapling, planting the sapling and reported. You are very happy about that. You are in a higher education institution. You are the boss of the university. You get to see that and you feel elated. And then not only that, some universities actually enlarge them and put them on the notice board of the university. 2 lines on the 26th page of a supplement of a local publication. Imagine. That's what our range of imagination, our commitment is. Okay? So, our universities are run with absence of vision. There is no vision. If only there were a vision, says a poet. But here there is no vision. There is only defect of vision, if you can say. That's what Naipaul talked about in Indian context several years ago. So what do we do? This is the fury. And then this is also wind and fury of the globalization. All kinds of things. People talk about photo occasions. They want to be in the media. I don't know why the educationists must be in the media, first of all. We don't understand that. You're doing a work because you're interested, you are passionate about teaching, you're passionate about discovery, you're passionate about invention. So why do you have to be in the media? I don't understand, okay? So the major malaise, even if we were to address the problems from above, that we will open up new universities, we will provide foreign funding, etc., the deeper problem remains. The deeper problem is that the discourses that we have taken up and then assimilated, we have institutionalized these discourses and the institutions, we haven't begun to think about them. The discourses of whether social sciences or humanities, these discourses have come from another culture. By this, I'm not saying you should close down these discourses, but from within this, something must begin to emerge. Okay? They have emerged, these social science discourses, humanities discourses, who is the human in the humanities that we teach? Who is the human being that we are talking about? These become important kind of questions, and we barely have begun to ask these questions. We simply churn out and then repeat constantly like a disc jockey, repeating the same number constantly. We continue to do that in the universities. This is the deeper malaise. What's the milieu into which the implants are taking place? Do the implants coexist with the host culture that is there? Okay, this is the place where we require a certain kind of reorientation. Sorry, I didn't see you there, show you. But that reorientation, if it were to take place, that reorientation requires a certain kind of internal transformation. What kind of courses do we teach? How do we teach? Where these courses are emerging? What is the vision of these courses? What kind of reflection has gone into these courses? All these become very important kind of questions. Okay, programs and courses will have to be transformed, and then and we need to inculcate a kind of research culture that is absolutely necessary. And for this, of course, it has to be collaborative, along with the students, administrators, people who are concerned, but also about the larger society. We need to be in a position to affirm the cultural inheritances, the cultural milieu from which we have emerged, and whether that kind of cultural milieu has anything to contribute. Is there a reflection on being human from the cultures from which you come, from the cultures which we come, or do we have only one conception of the human which has been institutionalized over the last 150 years? That becomes an important, challenging kind of question, and that is a research question. It is not a sentimental question, but it's a research question. That is something that, as the inheritors of specific cultures, we need to be in a position to ask them and then begin to respond to that question. That is absolutely necessary. So I come to the end of this one. So if we have anything, and I think that there's no culture without anything, with nothing. So the question is that whatever the resources that are available to us, yeah, what do we do with what you have? That's the question that we have to continue to ask. It's an interminable question. It's a task that is ahead of us. Okay, globalization has given some things, but the more fundamental questions are still out there. Unless the changes will not come from above, the changes will have to come from within, from below, from us. That is something we all have to commit ourselves to, undertaking these transformations. And there is a possibility of doing that. I am not simply giving you a negative picture. There is an immense possibility of doing this. That engagement is something that's been going on. My own work and then our own work in the universities is an attempt to respond to the challenges that I have just indicated. Okay? There is a much longer road to travel, and then we are just beginning, it seems to me, and then we need to undertake that kind of inquiry. Thank you very much for your patience.